All right, so this is going to be episode 6 of deck profiles for the Brilliant Stars to Surgeon Sparks format. Um, so Prismatic Evolutions just got released, and I've been saying in my videos that I don't think Prismatic Evolutions is a new format or is like start of a new format because Prismatic Evolution is just a special set, so it's not meant to usher in a new format. So this is just gonna be um, an extension of the Surgeon Sparks format, basically. So I'm gonna be doing some deck profiles for the remainder of this format, and so this is gonna be a deck profile on Zapdos. Um, Zapdos necessarily isn't really a card, sorry, that has a lot of options to it. So I know that I've been doing multiple deck profiles in videos, and this is just gonna be um about one list for Zapdos that I have in particular. So this is my Zapdos list that I came up with for Surgeon Sparks. I think this is the first list I came up for Zapdos. Um so Zapdos came out in 151, and around 151 I think Paradox Rift was the last set that came out before 151. And so 151 was just a special set as well, and it was one of those sets that Pokemon does to sort of just promote Pokemon trading card game in general, right? So it wasn't meant to be a very influential set, but they still printed pretty good cards in it, you know, like Mew for example. And so the set did have an influence on the format, especially considering how powerful Mew was in terms of its ability and the history that the ability has in the game. So Zapdos was another card that came out in that set, and it got a little bit of play. And I mean, the concepts have largely been discarded, but I feel like the concepts were not really well founded to begin with. So Zapdos got a bad reputation in the game, basically, right? So this is my attempt to sort of rectify that, sort of. And so this video is gonna be sort of like an explanation into um, basically what Zapdos is trying to do in the Pokemon trading card game. Right. So this Zapdos card, Zapdos EX, 200 HP Lightning Pokemon, has the ability Voltaic Float. This Pokemon has any Lightning energy attached. It has no retreat cost. Has the attack Multi-Shot Lightning for 3 Lightning energy. Does 120 damage. This attack does 90 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon that has any damage counters on it. So it's an attack that can attack 2 Pokemon on the board. So generally, these attacks are pretty much like not as powerful as normal attacks would be that just attack one Pokemon. But this one does 90 damage, right? So that's a lot of damage, a lot more than average for an attack that can attack multiple Pokemon. So this card definitely got a lot of attention when it was released and announced. Um, and rightfully so, right? This card is very strong, right? If it has an energy attach, it can have no retreat cost, so that's already really good. And it's a lightning type, right? And lightning types are generally weak to fighting. So fighting is not really a very popular type in this format. So this Pokemon effectively has no weaknesses in most matchups. So that's already pretty good as well, right? And so Zapdos, um, when it came out, basically there have been it was pretty early into the Scarlet and Violet era, so there hasn't really been a lot of exploration in terms of what a certain archetypes can do that have been printed in Scarlet and Violet. So um, there wasn't really a jumping on of to this card when it came out, right? So and also the only really good Lightning archetype that had been played was Miraidon up to when 151 came out. So um yeah, Zapdos wasn't really in a good spot in terms of people being even willing to test it, basically, right? So what people basically did was they just took Miraidon, and they just put Zapdos in, and then they just put a Halucha in, and they tried to make Zapdos work that way, basically, as a way to make Miraidon be able to take more than two prizes in an attack, basically, right? Or take two prizes on a deck that doesn't play like two prize Pokemon, like Lost Zone decks, for example, right? So that was basically what people were doing in that 151 format, and then after that, pretty much Zapdos kind of just fell off, right? Um, Zapdos was not meant to be played that way. Um, Zapdos wasn't meant to be played as a tech card. It has a very good attack, and it's a very expensive attack. So playing this attack card as a tech card is very risky, right? So it's not something that where it's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna try to set up a three lightning energy attack in the middle of the game to try to swing the game, right? That's very risky, very difficult to do. And so clearly this card was meant to be played as an archetype in and of itself, right? It was the only one of the birth trio, as it's called, in the game series that had an EX card printed for it. So obviously it was meant to be played as an archetype, right? So um basically these attacks in the card game are known as spread attacks. And so ultimately the decks that play around them are known as spread decks, right? And spread decks kind of have a very misunderstood uh place in the card game, and mainly because there's not a lot of very well versed and very knowledgeable players that play the Pokemon trading card game. Generally, the trading card game is seen in the trading card game community as like quote unquote the easiest card game, at least to learn. And so people don't really give it the respect that it deserves. And so as a result, there's not a lot of very knowledgeable, well versed, scholarly players in the game, right? So it's misunderstood kind of what spread decks are, but basically I'm gonna try to explain kind of what spread decks are so that people who maybe play other card games or maybe play the trading card game can understand. So, if you look through a game like Magic the Gathering, for example, you notice that there's a lot of cards that disrupt your opponents, basically, right? And looking from a Pokemon trading card game perspective, having cards like this in your formats are basically like just different variations of control cards, basically, right? So just to take a quick look at trainer cards that are legal in the standard format right now. So we have a lot of cards that can do things like increase HP, for example, like Lively Stadium. You know, cards that can reduce damage, like Jasmine's Gaze. And these cards are not generally played in high counts in people's decks, right? Or played at all for that matter, right? So these generally would be played in specific combos to basically create a control board, basically, right? Cards like Metal and Memo, right? And so when we see cards like this in the trading card game, it's very obvious that these are control cards, right? These are not cards that you're gonna play in your deck because it's just taking up bench space. I mean, taking up deck space that can be used for more consistency cards, right? So from looking from a Pokemon trading card game perspective, it's very easy to understand that cards that disrupt your opponent are generally control cards, right? Like that's not the game is not supposed to progress in a way where you just go back and forth to disrupting each other. You're supposed to be setting up a board, basically, right? And so, control basically is very easy to understand in the Pokemon trading card game, right? Um, so kind of attacks like this that have uh different effects than just attacking the Pokemon's active should be understood the same way, right? In that they're trying to create board states where your opponent has to basically be interrupted, or basically that these are attacks that interrupt your opponent's progression and forces them to take different lines than they would have otherwise taken, basically, right? So I'm trying to argue that basically that um, attacks like multi-shot lightning and spread decks in general are just variations of control in the Pokemon trading card game, and are not a are not a strategy that you're supposed to be trying to build a strategy around, basically, right? So to look at it as such, you can understand that okay, that means I'm supposed to be trying to win through the strategy. I'm not trying to basically use it as a cheese to take a prize, basically, right? And so that's kind of what I'm trying to accomplish with the Zapdos list, and particularly with this Zapdos list. All right, so basically, since Zapdos' attack doesn't do that much damage, and since there's a very high HP Pokemon in this format, basically the goal of this deck is to mainly use Zapdos' attack and basically try to win through that idea of trying to take multiple prizes through different means in one turn, right? So just gonna go through this list real quick. So this is a Maridon, sort of has a Maridon engine, right? So you have the two Maridons EXs from Scarlet and Violet. Once during your turn, you may search your deck for up to two basic lightning Pokemon and put them on your bench, then shuffle your deck. Then it has the attack Photon Blaster, two lightnings and a colorless, just 220 damage. Then your next turn, this Pokemon can attack. Right, so mainly we're using this card for its ability. So basically, we get this card onto the bench, and then we can search our deck for two lightning Pokemon, basic lightning Pokemon. All right, so this deck plays a lot of lightning Pokemon in it, like the Zapdos, and also plays Regieleki VMAX. Right, so Regieleki VMAX, 310 HP Lightning VMAX Pokemon. So VMAX Pokemon are different than Pokemon EX because they give three prizes instead of two when you knock them out. And so consequently they usually have very high HP and very good stat line, basically. So it has the ability Transistor. Your basic lightning Pokemon attacks do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. That has the attack Max Thunder and Lightning, 220 damage for lightning and two colorless. During your next turn, this Pokemon can attack. So generally, of course, also using this card for its ability. Mainly what this card is doing in this deck is basically allowing Zapdos to hit numbers that it otherwise wouldn't be able to hit. Right? So again, if you watched my video about Blood Moon Ursaluna, you know that in control decks, you're not trying to set up a traditional board like you would for a normal deck. And so you're lines will be much different than if you're playing something like a traditional Miraidon deck, right? And so you play two copies of Regieleki VMAX, and your goal is basically to use the Regielekis to fix the damage that you would otherwise need a hit, right? So, for example, if you're playing against something like Regidrago V Star, then if you put one Regieleki into play, then Zapdos attack does 150 damage. So that means it can knock out a Regidrago V Star in two attacks instead of three, right? So that's generally the idea, right? And the other two prize Pokemon that we play is a 1/1 copy of Zero or V Star. So Very Air V Star is a 270 HP Lightning V Star Pokemon. Has the attack Crush and Beat for two Lightnings and a colorless. You do 190 damage. You may discard a card of Stadium in play. And it has the V Star power Lightning Storm Star. Choose one of your opponent's Pokemon 4 times. You can choose the same Pokemon more than once. For each time you choose a Pokemon, do 60 damage to it. This damage isn't affected by weakness or resistance. So basically, there's a card um, can basically, with comboed with the Zapdos, can set up a board state where you can basically take 4, 5, or maybe even 6 prizes in one turn, right? So Zero G Star is a card that really hasn't seen any play. It's maybe seen some play in some Japanese tournaments, but in terms of the North American scene, it really hasn't seen any play at all. And it's generally because this card, when it came out, was very hard to charge up, right? Even to charge up Crush and Beat was pretty difficult. And so this card was just seen as sort of just a non issue, basically, right? But now with the Zapdos EX, you can set up attacks where you're putting a lot of damage onto potentially Pokemon that are giving away two prizes. And you can use Zero Aur's V Star power to knock out these Pokemon from wherever they are on the board, right? So this a lot makes your opponent have to change up their game plan and ultimately functions as a control deck, basically, because of that. So that's kind of the crux of this deck. Then to facilitate that, we have support Pokemon. So we have Mew EX, which lets you draw cards. You have Squawkabilly EX, which just lets you draw cards on your first turn if you don't open a good hand, or if you can't set up with your opening hand. Then you play 2/2 Magneton. You can use this ability to put put lightning energy onto Pokemon like Zapdos and Zero Aura. Um, so you can charge them up in one turn and attack with them, right? And you play the Hawlucha, has the ability Flying Entry. When you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench during your turn, you may choose two of your opponent's bench Pokemon and put one damage counter on each of them. So you can use this card. So basically, if there's no damage in play, you can bench this Pokemon, and then you can use Zapdos attack and fulfill the condition where the Pokemon has to have damage counters on it for you to damage it. And we play Raichu. All right, so Raichu, this deck doesn't really have very strong attackers. So to compensate for that, if you have to knock something out like a Charizard EX, you can use the second attack, Dynamic Spark, 60X. You may discard any number of lightning energy from your Pokemon. This attack does 60 damage for each card you discarded this way. All right, so you get 6 in play. You use Dynamic Spark, you can do 360 damage. Right, that's not very hard to do considering you have Overvolt Discharge. We can put 3 in play. Then, as you know, you've been playing. since Scarlet and Violet base set, have the card Electric Generator. It says look at the top 5 cards of your deck and attach up to 2 basic lightning energy cards you find there to your bench lightning Pokemon any way you like. Shuffle other cards back into your deck. All right, so you can put 2 lightning energy into play. Then with your manual attachment, you can get 6 energy into play into 1 turn. All right, so very easy to attack and charge up. All right, so that's the Pokemon. Then we play our baby Pokemon. Elekid has the attack Crackling Shot. Attack does 30 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. Right, so Pokemon like Cleffa that have 30 HP. If your opponent wants to use this attack, then you can promote the Elekid, which is not very hard considering basically every single Pokemon in this deck has 1 retreat cost. Then you can use this attack, and this symbol indicates that it's for free, and you can just do 30 damage somewhere, right? And if you're not knocking out like a Cleffa, you can also just put it somewhere so that you can use Zapdos' attack, right? So this deck has a lot of ways to facilitate winning with Zapdos. So that's kind of the idea of this deck, basically, right? So for the trainers, draw support, we got Professor's Research, 4 copies. Discard your hand and draw 7 cards. Very powerful draw support. You have Ionos. Each player shuffles their hand and puts it on the bottom of their deck. Either player puts any cards on the bottom of their deck in this way. Each player draws a card for each of their remaining prize cards. Right, so 4 copies of that. You got your search cards, Nest Ball, 4 copies. Ultra Ball, 4 copies. You got our Gust, Boss's Orders, 3 copies. Then we've got Penny, right? So this is another kind of a control kind of type card. Um, put one of your basic Pokemon all attached cards into your hand. So in this deck, play cards like Alucha, um, where they're not really doing anything on your bench after they get benched. So a card like Penny would allow you to just pick them up so that you can free space up on your bench for more important cards, right? Also, you play cards like Squawkabilly EX, who also don't do anything after their abilities used. So you don't want them clogging up your bench. This deck thrives on having a lot of bench space. So Penny just lets you get cards off of your bench. And then you play 1 Pal Pad. So again, this is a control deck, so of course you want to play a Pal Pad in it. And also because since this deck doesn't have a lot of draw power, if you're discarding a lot of supporters early, then you want to get them back into your deck, right? That's kind of the other idea behind playing Pal Pad, right? And the games end pretty quickly, so you're not going to need a lot of them. So you can just play one. And the other card we play is Super Rod, just to get some resources back. Suffer up to 3 in any combination of Pokemon and basic energy cards from your discard pile into your deck. So another reason why we play 2 copies is because of an electric generator. And so Zapdos and Miraidon in general, their main way of getting energy into play is through electric generator. And since this is an odds based card, you don't want to be whiffing too much. So a card like Super Rod can fix your odds by putting more energies back into your deck so that you have higher odds of hitting with electric generator, right? The other way you fix odds is through Academy at Night. Play 2 copies. The Stadium reads once during each player's turn, that player may put a card from their hand on top of their deck. So this deck plays a lot of energies. Plays 11, and so you're gonna draw into a lot. So you can combo the energies with the Academy at Night, and you can use them to guarantee energies with Electric Generator, right? And the A spec we play is Scramble Switch. It says switch your active Pokemon with one of your bench Pokemon. If you do, you may move any amount of energy from the Pokemon you moved to your bench to the new active Pokemon. So Generally, in this format, honestly, maybe the only cards that are gonna survive attacks in this deck are Regieleki VMAX and Zero or V Star. And so you're generally not going to be using Scramble Switch to move energies from an active Pokemon to the bench. You're generally only going to be using it to use something like Miraidon's attack twice in a match. So generally, Scramble Switch is not going to be a very powerful card in this deck, but you'll still only play it because the idea is that um, since you're going to be using Electric Generator, you're going to need to have something in the active to use it, right? So, for example, Zapdos only gets free retreats when it has a lightning energy attached to it, right? So, if you attach a lightning energy to Zapdos, right, and you have to promote it, right, and you don't want to attack with Zapdos, for example, then you can do a combo where you do like Electric Generator, and then you scramble switch the energy from the Zapdos onto whatever you want to attack with, right? So that's kind of the idea of scramble switch. And also, there isn't really another better aspect that you'd want to play in this deck, to be honest. This is Surgeon Sparks, so um, no aspects from Prismatic Evolutions you'd probably even want to play, but there's not really any of the aspects that you want to play in this deck that really complement it. So Scramble Switch is just the aspect of choice, right? So those are the trainer cards. Then I mentioned already we play 11 basic lightning energy, right? Just to increase your odds, right? You play, you generally maybe want to play 9 because all your attackers cost 3 energy, and then they're all 2 prize Pokemon, so you're only going to really need a maximum of 9. Uh, but you want to play extras so that your odds are better with Electric Generator, right? So that's the Zapdos list. Um, Generally, there's a pretty uh, generally Miraidon decks, decks that have Miraidon in them, are generally pretty beginner friendly, and that's why people are attracted to them. But people have really got a bad understanding of kind of what Miraidon is supposed to do. So as a result, they've been playing it very strangely. I would say. Um, but Miraidon is supposed to be an odds based deck, right? And it's a very interesting archetype in and of itself, right? Because it's odds based, and also a lot of the cards that they've printed around Miraidon, a lot of Lightning Pokemon, are kind of like very controlled type cards, like Zapdos, right? And so they've created basically this odds based control concept where you're not really trying to um, control the game more than you are trying to get better odds, basically, right? So that's why in this deck I play cards like Academy at Night and I play 2 super odds, right? So Murata is a very cool card, right? And the cards they've printed to support it are even cooler, right? It's just very unfortunate that Miraidon has just basically become a way to just cheese out basic lightning and basic lightning Pokemon boards, right? That's not really what they were trying to do with Miraidon, right? So this is kind of my contribution to try to sort of shed some light on Miraidon, and so that we can see better concepts from Miraidon instead of just cheesy, as it's called in the trading card game, 2 prize beat stick decks, basically. Right. So this is my Zapdos list. Um, I kind of didn't give this deck too much play because I wasn't satisfied with my original list. This is a refined list version of my original list, and honestly, Looking at it now, I'd probably give this list a try. But with that's like Reggie Drago going around, it's definitely very hard to play this deck. So I wouldn't, test this thing for like a best of three or something like that. Well, actually, no. Take that back. This deck would probably be better in a test of three because, if a Reggie Drago just sets up and then they just get the Alolan Executor attack, swinging Fiend, they just win in 3 turns, right? So pretty miserable to play against that. So, um, wouldn't you know, take this list as a way to beat Reggie Drago. This is more of a way to sort of explore new control concepts and sort of expand more on kind of what control is in the Pokemon trading card game, right? So plan on kind of making more of these for this format. Just going through some control lists and control archetypes that I've been testing in this format. And so yeah, this will be it for the Zapdos deck profile. Thank you for listening and see you in the next video.